So today is all about forecasting. Specifically, why do we need forecasting? Well, for operations managers, this is super important because we use our forecast for all kinds of things. Anything from major decisions like building in new markets, investing in new facilities, to small decisions like hiring a part time person or even staffing plans for next week. So we use forecasting for all sorts of capacity decisions. We also use forecasting for planning inventory. So, what kind of inventory, where we need that inventory, what time and location, and certainly any buffers that we need. And then, of course, we use forecasting for all sorts of supply chain decisions as well. So, any future planning we're doing based on our forecast. So, when we look at forecasting, to clarify a couple of terms, a forecast is a prediction of future events. Now, of course, none of us can perfectly predict the future. So we try to use as much data as we can to make data driven forecasts that are hopefully more accurate. But at the end of the day, no forecast is 100% accurate. So that means we always have at least a little bit of forecasting error. That also means we're making all of our future oriented decisions off of inherently flawed data. Not that it's intentionally flawed, it's just that we can't perfectly predict the future. So when we're making these future decisions, we need to consider our historical forecasting error rates and take those into consideration. Maybe add additional buffer if our forecasts typically aren't that accurate. Now, we do have what's called time series, which is when we have a certain type of data that we can track over time, say, daily or weekly demand of a product. You could use that to build a model to predict the future demand of that product. And then you can also add in other variables like economic indicators or marketing dollars or trending to enhance your forecast as you go through time. We do have different demand patterns that we want to pay attention to. Kind of a normal, predictable product like, paper towels or toilet paper will have some variability, but be pretty consistent over time. So you can plan with the averages here for future demand. You can also have trending. Now, trending can certainly go up. That's what we would want to see as business professionals. But trending can also go down. So you can model trending behavior as well. Seasonal patterns can happen. This is anything from like Halloween costumes to Christmas decorations to swimsuits in the summer. You can have seasonal patterns. And then you can have multi year cyclical patterns. You actually see this in some of our like alcohol markets. You might have a trend of bourbon that's really popular for a few years, and then the demand goes down for a few years, and then it comes back. So you can actually track cycles that go longer than the annual fiscal year. And we also have to think about not only using historical demand to predict the future demand, but what level of analysis we're looking at. And the reason why we care about that is because the level of analysis tells us how accurate our forecast will be. For example, if I am trying to predict overall toothpaste demand, that's going to be relatively accurate. It's a high level forecast based on aggregate historical data. So I can have a pretty accurate forecast of what aggregate toothpaste demand will be. However, if I'm trying to predict a very specific SKU, say the cinnamon flavor of Crest, I might have historical data and I could certainly use that. But this lower level of analysis will have a lot more variability and therefore have a lot more error in that forecast as well. And then, of course, I have to think about, am I trying to predict demand in terms of number of units? So, number of units sold of a product or number of people served in a service? Or am I trying to predict money? So, revenues or profits? Now, of course, these two things are related, but they're not the same thing, especially in inflationary environments where your cost, of course, can change, but your pricing can change and your margins can fluctuate. So when we think about forecasting, it's important to be very clear. Are you forecasting units? Are you forecasting money? Because those are certainly different and require different data. And then the final thing to keep in mind is the time horizon of our forecast. So, short term forecasts, no surprise, are going to be more accurate than long term forecast. That shouldn't that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but it does have implications for our decision making. So when we're making short-term forecast, we're talking about, staffing levels, we're talking about production scheduling, short-term inventory plans, but as we get to long term planning, this is our least accurate forecast, but it's also the forecast where we're making major decisions like building new facilities or downsizing facilities or moving into new markets where it takes a couple years to get going. So we actually use our least accurate forecast for our biggest investment decisions. So it's important to keep in mind at any level of management how accurate your numbers actually are when you're trying to predict the future, and then taking that into consideration when building your buffer strategies, whether that's buffer capacity or just buffer in your general strategy for growth or downsizing. See you next time.